So this is guardrail, as I said. So these trees are just to fill space and protect the rest of the orchard. But here you can see the very high density training system. We're at 0.75 meters between trees. Okay. All the other training systems are twice that. All the others are 1.5. So for the sake of the experiment, we tried to keep everything the same, except this system has to be twice as dense. We're on a very dwarfing rootstock. This tree here is actually the very dwarfing one, Gisela 3. We're on a dwarfing rootstock and a vigorous rootstock. So what we will learn in the trial is whether 0.75 is ideal for this training system on this dwarfing rootstock or on the vigorous rootstock. And at the end of the trial, we'll say maybe this should be 0.6 and the vigorous rootstock should be 0.9 or 1.0. Everything is spaced now so we have a relative comparison between the systems. Actually, I think this is working beautifully. We did an analysis at the end of 3 years looking at how well the trees have filled their space and or whether they've grown too much for their space. And so this very dwarfing rootstock, Gisela 3, in the high density system was perfect.
Yeah, because 0.75 is high density.
Very high.
Yeah, it's high density definitely. So that's one of the key things for us. I mean, you can have under structure as many trees as you can and productive.
These trees with that rootstock, they had probably 5 times the number of fruit in the second year than any of the other training systems, and that's been maintained through the last set of data that we've taken. They've been more productive. As we walk through here, you'll be able to see we've got a lot more fruit on this system than the others.
Which separation you have between rows?
Separation between rows, I think, is 3.5 meters.
3.5.
And again, that's just our standard. Based on the training system, like this narrow system, we would be closer. And it depends also on how tall your trees are. This system, every year you cut the tree back, the shoots back to a short stub, and all the fruit happens at the base of the new shoots. So all this growth that we see is going to be cut back very close to keep it very narrow and make it a fruiting wall. One of the questions that we've started to ask is, can we do that mechanically to reduce the labor cost? Because this is a very intensive system to prune. If you prune every single shoot, but it's the most productive so far too. So we'll work the economics out as we optimize the system. These fruit, I think, are about 10 days to 2 weeks away. Again, it depends on what our weather conditions are over the next 10 days to 2 weeks. So I'm expecting them to grow another 30%.
Whoa.
We've grown fruit in our high tunnels 32, 34, 35, even 36 millimeters in caliber. Very large fruit, averaging 12, 13, 14, 15 grams, averaging the yields. That's management of the environment and the irrigation.
Are you not afraid to lose, if you put the rows closer together, that you lose some more lights for them?
Yeah, so that's a matter of what's our optimum height
okay.
and how close we can come. But as we get to a fruiting wall, you see we get pretty good light distribution throughout, as opposed to some of the other more traditional systems. Well, this is more traditional, but you see it's quite variable in here. That's very uniform.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you can tell, right?
Yeah.
So this is the SSA.
But in terms of productivity, that means that which one is going to be more productive or could be more productive? The train system is going to have an impact on productivity as well?
Yes. We expect it will, and we're seeing that difference right now between the systems. Someone mentioned the bushier system. It was very hard to find fruit.
Yeah.
Well, we lost a lot more spurs in those systems, and I'm not positive why we did. But that's the kind of thing we'll be looking at. Will the KGB equal the SSA, equal the UFO on a per square area of orchard basis? KGB here, of course, we wouldn't space this as closely as we would a narrow fruiting wall. We're not as tall on this. So the row spacing was going to vary by canopy training system as well.
Could you explain the KGB again for me?
So the KGB is a bush, the Kim Green bush, Kim Green being a cherry grower in South Australia, Adelaide area. And the goal is to have the fruiting on these upright shoots, and you have a target number that you develop in the bush. Kim grows trees outside on various vigorous rootstocks, so he targets 25 to 30 uprights per tree, and they're spaced farther apart. We're on these dwarfing precocious rootstocks, and so we're thinking, well, we're probably more in the lines of 12 to 18 uprights per tree. And something that we're just now understanding is on these dwarfing rootstocks, they tend to create flatter branches, which used to be a highly desired trait on that kind of tree. Cherries want to grow upright, so when you got rootstocks that cause the branches to be more flat, it's better. But on a system that grows upright, if they're more flat, it's not such an advantage. And so you see we've got this, we would like this to be growing up like this, and it's growing out flat with this rootstock.
So did the KGB come first, that they wanted to have it so that the uprights would be coming out from a fuller plant, I guess, a more branched plant, and then from there they went to the UFO where they're putting the tree down to get the shoots going straight up.
Right. The KGB, you head the tree when you plant it, so you get 4 or 5 branches. You cut them again the same growing season, so you get 4 or 5 more. So at the end of the first year, you got 10 or 12.
Yes.
Going into the second year, you cut them again. That doubles them, so now you're up to 20, 24 branches. And you're hoping that they grow strongly upright like a cherry grows.
Yes.
And your fruit all along those upright shoots, you don't want these lateral branches creating shade of the fruit. You want the fruit to all be along here in the upright spurs.
Got it.
So ideally this is how it's growing up. This will be all spurs, fruiting spurs next year. There'll be a little cluster of fruit here, and in 2 years this will all be fruiting spurs.
Gotcha.
So the UFO is taking that same idea of growing fruit just on the upright with very little lateral branching.
Yes.
But putting it into a flat plane.
Yes.
Growing it from a cordon like a grape.
And planting it also on an angle.
Well, yeah, so the thing that my student came up with, the great idea that he did was if we use the tree as a cordon like a grape, instead of planting the trunk like this and growing in branches out, and then uprights coming off of that, just plant the tree flat and let the uprights come directly from that tree.
Brilliant idea.
Yeah. So this probably doesn't look a lot like Howard's or Kim's Kim Green bush because we don't have enough upright growth. We've got too much horizontal growth, largely due to the rootstock.
That's the vigorous rootstock.
No, that one there is the most dwarfing.
That's the most dwarfing one. Okay.
The least vigorous.
Okay.
This is that SSA system with the most vigorous rootstock. And you see so much more growth on it compared to the first set of trees we looked at down there.
Yes.
The same close spacing, but when we did the data at the end of 3 years, we found that it had overgrown its space by 30%. So it filled the space and more in 3 years. So we either need to plant these further apart or decide whether that vigorous of a rootstock is even suitable for this kind of high density training system.
It's one of the things that the industry, I mean, everybody is right now worldwide trying to find the right training system to see which one fits better in their area, because everybody's doing this sort of trials, and
it just makes sense to have more of a wall for spray penetration, for light penetration, for uniformity. But how to get that and make it successful is
a worldwide concern. I mean, everybody's just trying to focus on which one is going to fit better.
How much of an impact is a higher density versus more expensive rootstock? over the life of a cherry tree. So if you're saying I've got less trees here, but I've got a more aggressive rootstock, I'm getting the same wall that I'm wanting with less planting. But does that have a great impact over the life of a cherry orchard? I don't even know how long an orchard lasts for.
Yeah, it should last at least 25 years.
Okay.
And that's a big question growers always ask. As we move to high density, will my productivity be maintained at that high early level for all 25 years, or will we start to see a decline?
Yes.
And so one of the factors in our development of these systems is renewing the fruiting sites. As a tree gets older, the fruiting sites, the spurs, can continue fruiting for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, but the fruit quality goes down each year. And often that old spur is getting more and more shaded each year because you're growing out beyond it. So with the new training systems we're working on, like this one, where I said you cut every shoot back, you're renewing that fruiting wood. So your fruiting sites are actually very young, even if the trunk of the tree is 25 years old.
Yes.
We think that's the key to maintaining productivity in a high-intensive orchard over a long period of time. Don't let any of the wood get very old.
Right.
Minimize the permanent wood. The only permanent wood in this system is that trunk. The only permanent wood in the KGB is that stump down there. All these uprights get cut back every 5 or 6 years and regrown, so you always have young wood.
Yes.
I think that'll keep the productivity for a long period.
Is there a significant difference in the cost of the rootstocks or the cost of the
Yeah, there is.
tree?
These precocious rootstocks cost more, a couple dollars per tree more.
Okay.
We've talked with the Germans developed the Gisela rootstocks. And they own the rights to them worldwide, so they set the royalty rates on them. And we've talked to them about the high cost is inhibiting growing high-density orchards at this point. If they could come up with a per hectare royalty, if a grower wants to plant 200 trees on that rootstock per hectare or wants to plant 3,000 trees per hectare, you know, what would the appropriate royalty be? And then just charge a per area royalty rather than a per tree royalty, because per tree hinders high-density plantings.
Okay. Yeah.
Economics.
Yes. Of course. Sure. Yeah.
There are some competing rootstocks that are now starting to come onto the market that may have different economics. Going back to your question about filling that space, if you're on a precocious rootstock that's going to fruit in the 3rd year, then if you fill that space with 1 tree compared to 2 trees, you're better off economically to do it with 1 tree.
Mm-hmm.
If you use one of the old standard rootstocks that will fill the space but won't fruit till year 5, then it's not worth it.
Greg, there
Yep.
is a cracked fruit here.
Yeah, I think there's
Oh, it's
a cluster on up the way here though.
Okay, this one just has one fruit.
Yeah, I think if I can find the tree, it had like 5 cracked fruits
Okay.
on. And there's a number of different types of cracks that I wanted to look at. This is the UFO, where the tree's planted at an angle, and the fruiting uprights come up from the angled trunk. And every 5, 6 years or so, we cut those uprights out and let them regrow, again to maintain young wood that's going to last for a long period of time. But otherwise the tree is managed like a KGB.
Yes.
So you eliminate the laterals and you grow it upright. And the fact that you've got a trellis adds some cost,
Yes.
but it allows you to train those uprights in a
So
much
you-
more uniform pattern,
Yes.
minimize the labor issues.
And then also the total height, from a harvesting standpoint, is going to always be less than in a KGB. Or is it?
You
Are
can
they
probably-
roughly?
you
Are
can
they
maintain
roughly
it.
the?
They're roughly the same. You can probably
Okay.
maintain it
Okay.
however you want. When I prune these trees, I measured the time it took to do the pruning in each system, and this was the easiest system to prune. KGB was the next easiest. The traditional spindle was took about twice as long to prune compared to these, the 2 upright systems.
Manually, right?
Manually, yeah. And the SSA took about 4 times as much time. Yeah.
And you can also prune this with machine in the future.
Primarily by machine, yes. And then you do some individual pruning for the renewal. But yeah, it would be very, very efficient labor-wise for pruning. And it has that mechanical potential that the KGB would not.
Yeah.
Let's see where these... somewhere in here, I believe, were the cracked fruits. Oh, we got dirt in here. There we go. That's it. There's lots of nice cracks.
Yes, okay.
So it's exactly as Richard described for the issues with tomatoes. The primary cracking that happens in cherries is from rain falling on the fruit, pooling around the stem, so you have long contact time, or dripping off the bottom of the fruit. The last part of the fruit to dry is that bowl, or it's the drip dripping off the bottom. And so you get bowl cracks or tip cracks from rain primarily. And any rain, that's going to be the first component of cracking. If you are inundated with a lot of rain, so the fruit is exposed for a long period of time, but also the soil is being saturated with water, then you start getting water taken up through the tree. And as Richard described, if you're in a situation where you're not having much transpiration of that water out through the leaves, the water comes into these fruit that's full of sugar, high osmotic potential, they're drawing water in, and eventually they swell and crack. And so when you get internal water cracking, you see the cracks along the sides like this. It's not from any exposure of water, it's from the internal pressure. You see all these side cracks? Yeah. The work that showed this really nicely came from Tasmania, Penny Measham at UniTassie. So we've cracked, when we had rain in my high tunnels, back in 2008 I believe it was, we had as much as 60 to 90% cracked fruit outside. Inside the tunnel where we had the variety that had 60%, the tunnel reduced it to 30%, but we still had cracking because the water was coming off the plastic, coming down into the root zone and being taken up. And the variety that had 90% cracking outside, we had as much as 60% cracking in the tunnel. At that time I said, well, we're on a soil that holds a lot of water, has a high water holding capacity. I probably would never see that on our other tunnel site at Benton Harbor, which is sand. The next year I had switched that project over to a high frequency irrigation. Research out of British Columbia showed that cherry trees really respond nicely to multiple irrigations per day, but for short durations, particularly on these dwarfing rootstocks. And so we had switched to the same regime, and we cracked the fruit with our irrigation system in the high tunnel. Those fruit never saw a raindrop, and we had significant cracking inside. So we ratcheted back our irrigation regime, and since that time we've done a very good job. This is a variety that's very sensitive to cracking.
Right.
And so that's probably why we're seeing cracking here and we're not seeing it over there through the irrigation system.
Through the irrigation system. What would a farmer do if he's getting cracking like this? Is there a cultural practice if they say, I'm seeing cracking, does he send workers out to take the cracking away so that he's not getting mold or fungus or mildew? You just leave it.
Have to leave it and
just
live
suck
with
it up, yeah. And it just means more for when you're harvesting that you have to harvest around that.
Yeah, you tell the pickers, drop the
Yeah.
cracked fruit on the ground, put the good fruit in.
Right.
It slows down picking.
Right, but you don't have necessarily a host area for now pests or something else going on.
Yeah, you have a greater potential for diseases coming in. In fact, this is where we can see thrips in these cracks right now feeding on the fruit.
Okay. Interesting.
So even when you get rain, oh, this is a really good point, even when you get rain that doesn't cause any obvious cracks, you get micro cracks on the fruit. This has been shown by several researchers over the years. And those micro cracks, when the fruit is harvested and goes into storage, are entryways for fungi, and you get much less shelf life. So a grower can say, oh, I dodged that cracking incident, it rained, but the fruit looks good, you pack it in the box, you ship it off, and received a week later, they open it up and you're seeing some mold and stuff growing there, and the fruit goes downhill very quickly post-harvest. So, yeah, that's a really good demonstration. I need to take some pictures of that. Irrigation-induced fruit cracking. So these are the more traditional trees, the tall spindle trees. This is that most dwarfing rootstock. So you see, for a tall spindle tree, on that very dwarfing rootstock, we have not filled the space. Whereas on the high density, we filled it beautifully. It was ideal. So this, if we were growing a tall spindle on a dwarfing rootstock like that, very dwarfing, we need to be planting closer together.